Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about some of the greatest successes in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Because I've talked a lot about various issues in the game, the biggest failures, consistent issues in Warhammer 3 and in Total War as a whole, but there are absolutely certain things that Creative Assembly has done very well in this game. And hopefully they will be carrying over some of these ideas, if not all of them, in future Total War games. I would give an honorable mention for how Creative Assembly decided to do corruption in Warhammer 3. Because I understand that due to the way the map is designed, and really the settlement density, corruption has kind of become a joke. But the fact that you have a way, by just capturing settlements, to increase your corruption or winning battles, you have a way of increasing your corruption, improving your situation in terms of either removing it or increasing it, dependent on who you're playing as, it is a pretty big deal. And the reason it's such a big deal is because certain factions, it's actually a bigger deal, not so much for the factions that don't want corruption, it's a bigger deal for the factions that need corruption, because previously, and even now, the AI has a lot of ways of negating corruption, but you as the player, well, let's just say vampire counts, did have some very substantial issues on this subject. So this is one of the great things, corruption, but again, honorable mention. One of the greatest things they've done is the resource system for the Chaos Dwarfs. Not necessarily the balancing act of it, though that has been a problem in Troy. They obviously didn't create it in this game, but I think the idea of getting raw materials, then using those raw materials for armaments in order to fuel your economy, or using raw materials for your economy or for armaments, which then allow you to improve units and increase your own unit capacity, is a damn fantastic system. Again, execution could be better. I'm not going to dispute that, but one cannot deny that what Creative Assembly has done with regards to the resource system of the Chaos Dwarves, including the labor system, is absolutely a step in the right direction in terms of creating a more complex economic system. Now, the reason I feel this is better than Troy in certain ways, Troy could work better, but only if you had the resources available. Gold in particular was a problem. So it was always that kind of balancing act of, you need these specific settlements. Whereas here with the Chaos Dwarves, you kind of build the economy the way you want. However, resources are still important because resources do give you some significant benefits on their own. Like you look at iron, it's producing a lot of freaking armaments that you do want in an economy. Or you look at several other things, you look at gem refinery, that's going to give you a huge amount of gold production. Or you look at marble. Right, so lots of raw materials that you can gain from it. Does require a good amount of laborers to work on it, but still pretty substantial. So resources are still important, and you do care about them a great deal as Chaos Dwarves. But the fact you do have a baseline economy that works, as opposed to running out of resources in Troy and Farah and then having to constantly trade for them, which basically ended up a game of abusing the AI, that is a vastly better situation than pretty much anything we've had before in Total War. And hopefully they take the system and further improve on that, and based on what they've shown of Medieval 3, they might just be doing so. We'll find. Now, the second greatest success for Creative Assembly comes from the Kislev rework. Not the rework as a whole. There's plenty of issues with regards to it, like how Katrin and Kastaltin gain supporters. But one of the problems for Kislev since Warhammer 3 was launched is that they're meant to fight chaos, stand up to chaos, defeat chaos. Well, one of the things you realized as a Kislev player is that it was much more beneficial to actually conquer the Empire in both Realms of Chaos and Immortal Empires, especially in Immortal Empires. It's far easier to do so. You're not dealing with Legendary Lords. You're certainly not dealing with the likes of Tamarkon, Archeon, Arbold Undefeated, and others. So it was much more beneficial until Creative Assembly changed the incentive structure for Kislev, and that is a genuine win for Creative Assembly. So here's what they did. One, they made it so that at a high level of devotion, the climate penalties are removed. So over 75 devotion, climate penalties are removed. Atamans can also remove climate penalties, all that kind of stuff, right? So there's various things you can do to negate the kind of downsides that you incur when you're trying to deal with the Chaos Wastelands and conquer that territory, hold back the tide of chaos. So that's a great thing. That does make it easier, but making it easier doesn't change the incentive structure. What they did, however, on top of that, absolutely does. I mean, of course, Atamans do benefit experience-wise. You do get an extra benefit of supporters fighting against chaos. All of those things are great, but you need to have a genuine incentive structure besides supporters for it to be worth it. And here's where the brilliance comes in. Because when we look at Kislev, there are all kinds of benefits that you do acquire. But the most important one is spiritual conquest over here from the Orthodoxy. What spiritual conquest gives you is a population surplus of +1 for newly captured settlements and +100 devotion for newly captured settlements in the Chaos Wasteland. So take over 2 settlements, you're max devotion. Doesn't matter how low your public order was, you take 2 settlements in a province in the Chaos Wasteland, you're in a really good spot in terms of your devotion. And this is a critical aspect because devotion is used for a number of things. So one of the things is that the high level of devotion gives you, as I said, the climate penalty nullification, which is a pretty damn big deal when you're looking to deal with unpleasant climate, especially if you're playing Catherine or Castalton. But even for Borisurs, it's a pretty damn big deal. But then you also have these invocations, and these invocations further give you benefits to your campaign, like faster construction, growth benefits, local recruitment capacity, replenishment, all very important things. And then on top of that, the final part of it is you get the army invocations as well. So you get army invocation of dash for character experience, flaming attacks, replenishing in foreign territory, battle healing cap, magical attacks, pretty damn important when dealing with demons, I should add, or just campaign movement range. So what this has done is they've turned Kislev from a race where it was just really good to blow up the Empire to a race that is incentivized in a lot of different ways to actually take over the Chaos Wastelands, and that does work. Sure, there are downsides still, there's still difficult battles, but at least at the moment, sure, you could say that you don't always go for this specific path, fair enough, but at the moment, it actually can feel rewarding to do so as Kislev. It can be good territory, you can get good control, you can nullify climate penalties, you can restore Kislev to its full greatness, and that is a pretty big deal from my perspective with what CA did with the rework. And of course, you do also benefit from all those supporters you're gaining, so extra stuff over here. And I think in general, the Court and Orthodoxy, while there are certain specifics of how you gain supporters and some things here that aren't great, but I think this is a much better research tree than the general research tree we have. That is a real success for Creative Assembly, and I hope they will carry these lessons going forward, because a lot of the time they try and push players towards dealing with certain objectives, but many times we've seen in Total War that dealing with those objectives or fighting certain foes just feels like busy work that's not rewarding. We're just doing it because we're forced to, not because we want to. Whereas now, if you're playing Kislev, you want to fight chaos, and that's a real win. And then finally, the greatest success in Total War Warhammer 3 comes from Thrones of Decay with Malachi Mckayson and the Dwarf rework. So the Dwarf rework did some amazing things. As I've stated, Creative Assembly has struggled with creating a proper incentive structure for people to go out there and do stuff in a campaign, but not so much with the Dwarves. And there's a reason why Malachi's campaign is the single most played campaign in the game, according to CA themselves. So first off, you have the Age of Reckoning. Could be better, I know, like the way you gain grudges on certain targets could be handled in a better way. But this system of forcing you to go out there, fight opponents, to get benefits in your campaign is amazing for the short term. So this pushes you to constantly be active in a campaign, and that's just the start. Because Age of Reckoning is kind of the least important part of it. It is great to consistently keep the flow of a campaign going, always feeling like in each Age of Reckoning you're, striving for something, but it's actually the least important part in all of this. The second thing to do with all of that is all those grudges you're selling also give you Confederation of Legendary Lords, but more importantly, you get these Legendary Grudge objectives that are like long-term objectives to strive for in your campaign. Like each Legendary Lord kind of has a grudge they're aiming for to complete in the short term, but then they have medium-term objectives, longer-term objectives, and when you combine the fact that you can confederate any Legendary Lord of the Dwarves across the world with these systems, it means that you end up having a lot of replayability in your campaign, because a campaign where you're, say, confederating Grombrindal as Malachi is going to be very different than one where you're confederating Thorgrim very early on, or Belegar, or Ungrim. So very different experience all across the board, regardless of which Legendary Lord of the Dwarves you're playing. And then, of course, the final part in all of this are Malachi's adventures. Malachi's adventures, sure, rogue armies can feel a bit static, not as dynamic, all that, as, Age of Reckoning and so on, or the Confederation potential what Legendary Grudges give you, but it does create a system of medium-term objectives to strive for genuine rewards. So when you add all of those things together, you end up with the single best campaign experience in Total War as a whole, bar none. There is no campaign experience that compares to what Malachi has to offer. And it's not even because of Malachi's unique power. It's because of that objective structure, that incentive structure, and how replayable this campaign is, just simply because of Confederations and Legendary Grudges, and of course, adventures do add on top of that. But all dwarves are inherently far more replayable. Sure, dwarves are not the perfect race. They have their problems, if you will, but that system in itself is simply amazing. And I think that if there's anything Creative Assembly should carry over in future games, and hell, even DLCs in Warhammer 3, it is exactly this idea. Not the exact specifics, but the idea of constant dynamic objectives, replayability, etc., is something Total War has struggled with for a very, very long time. And this is why Thrones of Decay is the single best DLC that they've ever released. That's all I had to say. Costine signing out. Stay tuned for more.